know, there were people who lived in this very place just a couple of generations ago whose ecological footprint was almost immeasurably small compared to ours today. And it seems that we'd rather cover the world in solar panels than imagine there's anything worth remembering about how they knew how to live. Which certainly included a collective capacity for restraint and making meaning out of less, not more. And so, in this project, I ask often, what does a human look like who's not a consumer? Because the basic instructions for being a consumer can be a little bit hard to bear if you really think about them. And over time, being engaged in this work, I've begun to think that perhaps neighboring is the best word to describe a person who has the capacity to sustain others.
Just got yanked out and uh-oh. Yeah, they learned pretty much in one time. Yep, she.
So a friend of mine has a convenient way of describing what happens here, which is simply by saying what doesn't happen here, which is just that nothing from this place will ever be sold or bartered, or simply the food isn't for sale. When the food's offered as a gift, say, for example, I'll go and knock on a neighbor's door who I haven't met before with a box of frozen beef, introduce myself, tell them a little bit of the story of this farm, and ask if they'd be willing to eat some of the food from the farm. And almost universally, the response that I hear is, but surely someone needs this more than I do. And it's quite remarkable that you will never hear that statement uttered in the grocery store aisle as someone walks back and forth looking at the shelves stocked, or say at the butcher counter at the grocery store. I've imagined the butcher standing there with person after person, unwilling to bring the beef home because they've decided that surely someone needs that more than they do.
Hello.
But with the neighbors, I've been lucky enough that people are willing eventually to take to receive the beef and eat it gladly.
Yeah. Are those tomatoes?
Yeah, look at that one.
Holy!
Yeah, pretty nice looking, eh? These ones are paste.
You know what I'm all out of, and I'd rather have them right from the garden, is carrots.
Oh, we don't have any carrots right now. But I told Lori I would bring her because we have a lot of tomatoes, so.
Yeah, she'll be out in a second.
Okay, great.
That's a tomato?
That's a tomato, yeah.
Oh my God.
It's called striped German. This is the most delicious tomato I've ever eaten. I'll tell you.
Thank you for stopping by.
Yeah.
Someone, thank you for tomatoes.
And thanks for sharing the water. That's been really
Oh,
helpful
I
for
hope
Ashley.
so.
And
I
actually
hope so.
having the bull there right now means that one of my girls who's in heat, it can go up and see the bull right there rather than
Oh,
walk
good.
down the road.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thanks, Adam, for the
Yeah,
tomatoes.
take care.
Do you need any eggs?
I haven't finished those, but
Okay,
so
let me know.
But I will let you know.
Okay.
Last winter, we experimented with putting soup into quarts and distributing them at the library every Saturday. So the librarian was willing to have a cooler of soup outside the library and asked people if they would be willing to receive a quart of soup.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. After I dropped the cooler of soup off and then retreated back to the farm for the day on Saturday, what did you notice?
I made sure to tell everyone first that the cooler was there and what was in it, and to take some food for themselves and their neighbor. I encouraged them to take two. Mm-hmm. And the conversations were amazing. It was the little children that were the most excited to be taking food to their neighbors, or both neighbors in some cases. So
I remember something that you said, Robin, which was, you said something like, people in third world countries might not have a lot of money, but they get to eat real food. I think you said that to me.
What we allow the people in this country to eat as food is really quite scary compared to other countries. So
In this area, just a few generations ago, everyone ate local food, and it was all organic. Because that's all there was.
Yep.
And somehow we afforded it back then. I'd heard about this place from my neighbors down the road. They'd talked about this old farm that was sitting quiet, abandoned, unoccupied by humans, rewilding. So I came over here, I snuck past the no trespassing sign. I hadn't made an appointment with the realtor. It was very early in the morning. And this place was all grown over with vines. So the entrance to the barn had vines growing over, and I parted some of the saplings that had grown up over the years. And when I stepped inside the barn, what I found was a building that had served the purpose of sustaining human life in the form of milking 8 cows, the stanchions still just as they were, an old manure trolley that still ran on a track up and down the middle to take the manure from the cows out to the spreader to go back out to the fields. The place was a bit of a time capsule, and there was a story here that grabbed a hold of me. So here's a farm that's on the market for sale for $500,000 at that point. The circumstance presented itself that one of my neighbors approached me and said that they had access to family money and would like to buy this farm and place it in my hands as a place to move to continue the work of food gifting. And so that's what came to pass. I was handed a check for $500,000. In a lot of ways, it would have been easier not to accept that gift, is what I'll say.
This is the toughest weed yet.
And so the question of access when it comes to land, I mean, I've spent so many hours wondering how I could ever justify having access to land when others don't. Those first months, I would think of a tool that I needed, and within an hour or two, I would find it, leaning up against the side of one of the outbuildings or the sheds that the old man, his name was Henry, who last lived here and died here. Apparently Henry was quite well organized and maybe even a bit fastidious about how he set things, the way he left things, the notes I find attached to a little baggie of the right fasteners for certain hinges that he left, tied together with a piece of twine. Henry went to bed one day and planned to wake up the next morning because when his body was found a few days later, his clothes had been laid out for the next morning along his bedside, and his place settings laid out on the table for his breakfast the next day.
little one. At some point, if we pull the mustard greens, we'll get a little bit more sunlight to the beets that are growing beneath them, but it's also sad to say goodbye to the mustard greens.
It seems like there are three categories of access, of the way in which something lands in our hands. There's buying,
Yeah.
and then there's this other category that would be called free bread. And then there's a third category that might be called bread as a gift.
That's my easy coat.
And early on, when we started the gift stand, I'd hear a lot from people, how's that free bread project going? Because in the early days, we were distributing bread alongside the soup that was made from the ingredients from the farm. And I found myself bristling at the word free bread because I kept picturing a pile of stuff that you pass on the side of the road with a free sign. And what's happened to that stuff? It's stuff that used to have a market value, but all of a sudden the number's been crossed out and it has 0 next to it instead. It's still a market item that all of a sudden is worth $0. So it's been made valueless. It seems the gift does almost the opposite. The value of the gift can't be quantified, and so it tends to rest heavily in our hands. And I use the example of the sweater that Grandma knit you from the sheep that she raised. So here you are with a sweater on that Grandma sat for untold hours, carding and washing. That alone is enough to make the sweater, you could say it rests heavily on your shoulders, or you could say it keeps you warm in a way that it might not otherwise if it had come from the store. So the food that's grown and harvested and preserved and cooked and served here goes out into the world as cooked meals at community suppers that we call gratitude feasts that are hosted once a month. And it had been clear to me that we weren't going to serve the food at a buffet line, because what happens, I don't know about you, but when I start my way down a buffet line, I simply have no idea what the appropriate portion size is. And if anything, I have a little bit of a lingering fear that there isn't going to be anything left for seconds when I go up. And so I'll pile my plate high. So we still serve the food family style and find that simply changing our relationship to the food awakens a capacity for village-mindedness, a capacity to imagine the whole before we serve ourselves. And it's quite remarkable to see that's in us waiting to be reawakened. And it's not a hardship for people to share with one another. It's actually quite joyful and quite meaningful and perhaps a whole lot less lonely.
Do we want to make it a round that separates into 2 parts?
We spread invitations around the neighborhood. We walk through town and paste flyers on storefront windows and leave a little stack on the librarian's desk. And various folks find their way here to join in what amounts to a bit of a ritual of Thanksgiving. So before the meal, we'll usually sing a few songs together, which can be a bit touch and go with a group of European American people singing together. But I hear again and again that people are so enlivened by the group singing. I found a way across the wide Missouri. Once we're done with the gratitudes, we'll work through a blessing that is the farm gratitude feast blessing. And because we always promise the sheep and the cows that they'll be able to hear us. So we ask people to really bless the meal with some gusto. And the lines to the blessing emerged over the years. The blessing goes like this: for the dark soil that cradles the seed, for the rains that bring forth the green leaves,
for the rain that brings forth the green leaves,
for the stars that give form to the flowers,
for the stars that give form to the flowers,
For all this goodness and beauty,
For all this goodness and beauty,
we give thanks.
we give thanks.
Let's follow you!
What if money isn't inherently evil, but inherently an abstraction, and perhaps the ultimate abstraction of life into property? If other people in the world with stored monies, whether it's $100 or $100,000 or $10 million, decided to release a little bit of that, to remove land from the tight and scarce grip of the market and free the land up to do its work of breaking the spell of scarcity, feeding humans still, even after all the slings and arrows, the world might look a little bit different.
My name is Matthias, and I'm the founder of Campfire Stories. Campfire Stories is a community-supported platform. That means the only way we can keep making these films is if we get support from the people who watch the films. So please consider joining us as a Patreon supporter. Thank you so much.